In high school gym class, we had a gym coach who was actually a retired Marine. He actually taught our sex education class. He told us that if we had sex with a Catholic girl, we almost certainly would get a venereal disease. He also forbade towel snapping in in the locker room. I don't think I even knew what towel snapping was. He said that he had seen the heads of penises ripped off because of towel snapping. In my young mind, I doubted seriously that that story was true, but it points up the idea that sometimes people think it's necessary to paint the most dire situation in order to get us to do stuff. Welcome. Welcome to Conservative Coffee Hour. I'm Stanley Smith. It's not all locker room talk at Conservative Coffee Hour, but it is adult conversation. And does everyone deserve to be respected? Yes, of course we do. But sometimes there are some sticky spots. I was struck recently by the idea that in the preamble to the Constitution, it says, in order to form a more perfect union, it never says anything about being perfect. Um, I don't want to say that we, set our expectations too high, but I think it's safe to say that we sometimes get in our own way. And what is it that gets in our own way? Often it's this following the rules stuff instead of focusing on the intent of the rules. That's what that's what gets in the way. It's not the rules that get in the way, it's how they operate. In following the rules, we get caught up in that and forget really what the intent and the point was to begin with. What was the intent? What was the intent of the Constitution? The intent was to preserve, protect, conserve, and advance our God-given rights of freedom and liberty for everyone. In U.S. foreign policy, this was manifest in the 1950s and 60s by the philosophy of the Niebuhr brothers and John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State under Dwight Eisenhower. It was the idea of countering every threat to our freedom with an equal opposing force. It's the concept of Christian realism. It's the idea that we are redeemed, but we're living in a fallen world. Somewhere along this tact on foreign policy, along the way, they seem to have doubled down on the fallen part and found it necessary to be the aggressor and get ahead of the fallen part and ahead of anyone, anywhere doing anything wrong in any place and in any time. All threats real and imagined. The idea is to make everyone so afraid of towel snapping, it simply never occurs. I I get it. It's for our protection. But is that what we signed up for? The protection part at all costs? It takes us back to the adult conversation. We we all have to live our lives as adults. We're not children. It was um, it was never the government's place during the pandemic narrative to tell us not to leave our homes, to wear masks, or get injections. They simply never should have done this. It was it was not their right. It was not constitutional, and it was also immoral. Only God can condemn, and he chose to forgive. No one has the right to step into that place that only God alone can occupy, but they did. They stepped into that place. People who stood up to the pandemic narrative really are to be celebrated and held up as examples. And for the rest of us who just went along with it all, well, it's a cautionary tale. But what can be learned from it is that this is not a new it's not a new story. U.S. federal and state governments have been stepping into a space they don't belong in for a long, long time, forcing integration, legislation on the definition of civil marriage, and the complete usurpation of the monetary system. As John McLaughlin used to say on the John McLaughlin News Hour, it's wrong, wrong, wrong. We've we've all been a little absent from the process. We've been asleep at the switch. And while we've been sleeping, we've been sold equity instead of freedom, diversity instead of pluralism, and legalism instead of what is lawful. Worst of all, we've encountered something I'm calling truth inflation. Like gold, truth's value always remains the same. God alone is truth. When we believe something other than that truth, we encounter the monetization or inflation of truth. We've all been wandering around in the wilderness, and the wilderness it's done its work. It's done its work on all of us. We're coming back to reclaim our government. Many people in states are organizing to take back their governments by, instead of just simply validating the current power structures with their votes, they're actually forming their own assemblies to represent themselves, to represent ourselves as the government by the people. It's not a novel idea. It's actually what the Constitution is all about. It's about we, the people. If you would like to join us as we continue to discuss this and many other topics at Conservative Coffee Hour is every Saturday at 10 a.m. Central Time on Zoom. I will include my email in the description of this video. I'll be happy to send you an invitation. And I look forward to seeing you very, very soon.